After I got back from Shanghai, God kept speaking to me directly, but the focus of the conversation changed a little bit. It was no longer on my identity as a steward, because I had already learned that. And no longer did he have to tell me about the ultimate truth about money, because even if I had tried to forget it, I won't be able to. The area of conversation then changed into generosity. There were different times where God told me to give different amounts to different people or institutions. And every time after I hear his voice, I will struggle a little, and then I would end up obeying. And then there will be a very supernatural ending to it. So there are three distinct stories I would like to share with you. They happened in chronological order. The amounts that God asked me to give really escalated from small to medium to large. So let me start with a small size story. And this took place in 2016. One Sunday at church, the seat next to mine was empty, and as the sermon was about to begin, this brother that I've never seen before at church walked in. He looked exactly like Kenny G, and he was holding a saxophone case. So that added to the resemblance all the more. When the sermon began, he brought out this really beat up Bible that I've never seen before. It was so marked up, and it had notes written all over it, so much so that I thought, wow, I need to say hello to this person after service. Indeed, it turns out he is a professional saxophone player. He just lost his job on a cruise ship, and now he's playing music in the streets of Hong Kong, trying to make a living. Now, our worship band does not have a saxophone player, so I thought, well, if he's so kind to stay with us and become part of our church family, maybe he can help us jazz up our music. So immediately I introduced him to our worship team. After they started having a conversation, I heard God speak three really clear words to me: give him money. So I was really nervous, and I looked in my wallet. I was trying to see how much cash I had on me that day. I had basically two $500 notes on me. So I had three options. One was to ignore the voice of God. Second option is to give half the cash I had on me to this stranger. Or the last option, which is to empty my wallet for this brother that I've never met before. I chose the last option. I went back to the group and I said, "Excuse me, sir, there's something I'd like to speak to you about. Can we step aside?" So we step aside, and I give him the money really discreetly. And then I ask him, "You must be a newcomer today. What brought you to our church?" And then he said, "God told me to come to this church this morning because someone was going to give me money to help me out with my living expenses." I felt this massive surge of electricity going through my body, and I was shocked that my obedience was able to complete this small miracle. So that's the small size story. Now we move on to the medium. 2017, a Korean American pastor by the name of Kenneth Bae came to speak at our church and shared his testimony with us. He was previously jailed in North Korea for about 2.5 years, and I was very moved by his testimony. A few months later, he came back to Hong Kong, and a brother from our church organized a small group dinner for him. At the end of dinner, Kenneth started to share what his agenda was. He wanted to start a brand new ministry based in Seoul for North Korea. For starters, he wanted to generate 24/7 round the globe prayer for North Korea. And in addition to that, he wanted to help a lot of ex-North Koreans who have escaped to Seoul to help them to adjust to living in South Korea and to bring them to Christ. Now, I thought that's a very worthwhile ministry. All of a sudden, I heard a number. Now, the dinner was in Hong Kong, so naturally that number should have been in Hong Kong dollars, right? But no, it wasn't. It was a very specific US dollar number. And once I heard it, I said to God, no, please. Now, why did I say that to God? I shared earlier that in 2014, I had overcome my panic attack because of negative cash flow. Well, since 2014, my income just dropped even lower. And there was no expectation of any bonuses to be paid at the end of 2017. And that amount that I heard would have represented another 18% of my base salary for the year. So it would have made that negative cash flow even bigger. That's why I was reluctant to give. So my immediate natural reaction was to ask Kenneth Bay. I said, Kenneth, actually, do you know how much you need to start your ministry? He said, I have absolutely no idea. So I thought, whew, maybe I can put this off for a while. So even though my wife Sylvia was at dinner with me, I was so freaked out, I did not even tell her that I heard this number. A few months later, I received an email. It has a very detailed ministry plan, line by line on what amounts had to be spent on each item. And at the end of it, at the bottom of the email, was a nice round US dollar figure. It was identical to the number that I heard at dinner a few months earlier. On the one hand, I was very pleased to be on this supernatural communication channel with God, where I was able to hear what the cost would be for starting this new ministry. On the other hand, I was very troubled because if he told me this number months ago, he means business. So I need to do something about it. So I was very quick to start a WhatsApp group with the other families that were in attendance with dinner that night. And I was very pleased that a brother who's a brain surgeon, he said that, okay, well, there are 5 family units here at present at dinner, so why don't we divide that number 5 ways? So I immediately said, yes, this is a great idea. You know, giving out 1/5 is better than giving out the whole amount, so I thought. Long story short, after months and months and months, there was no one else gave the money. So in the end, I chose not to nickel and dime with God, and I just gave the full amount to Kenneth's ministry. However, his budget for his ministry increased by 40%. So it took the faithfulness of the brain surgeon brother and also another sister, their chipping in of the original 1/5. All 3 amounts added together, that was enough to help Kenneth start his new ministry. So out of this story, I learned 2 things. One, God is telling me you're not the only game in town. He had to, it took the faithfulness of the brother and the sister for them to donate their 1/5 before it could get going. And then the second thing is, you're just my fund manager. Whatever amount I tell you to give to whomever, don't nickel and dime with me. So that's the medium-sized story. Now we move on to the large-sized story, which is also my favorite. This also took place in 2017. Beginning of the year, my pastor was starting to contemplate about the possibility of our church buying our own premises. And once I heard that, I was very enthusiastic and I want to be as generous as possible. So I looked at my cash balance and I decided on a number that I thought was generous. Once I did the math a little bit more, I discovered the problem with that. Our church is relatively small with only maybe 70 to 80 family units. So basically, every family unit will have had to contribute the same amount that I decided before we would have any chance of buying property in Hong Kong. So I knew this wasn't going to work, so I ditched the idea of giving from my cash balance. So I looked at my balance sheet and I looked at what assets could I use to go towards this meaningful cause. There was this one stock that I bought in the tech bubble in the year 2000. It's US listed. When I bought it, it was 10 US dollars. Initially, it was in the gaming chip business. And I didn't sell it for 17 years. And unbeknownst to me, somehow it morphed into a proxy for the massive growth in artificial intelligence, probably because of the computing prowess of these chips that's used for video games. So by 2017, the stock had gone from 10 to 100. Now I thought to myself, well, if this stock continues to be a proxy for AI, then maybe it could easily go from 100 to 1,000. So I thought, okay, this is how I'm going to pledge. God, whenever and whatever price you tell me to sell the stock, anything above 100, I will share 50% of the profits with you and give it towards the church premises. I made this pledge to God probably around May or June in 2017. In October that year, my department at work got shut down. I was out of a job. My gut reaction was, Roger, you've had this idea about writing a book for a few years now. Before, you didn't have any time to do it, but now you've got plenty of time. So why don't you do that well, get a lot of endorsements, find a publisher, get it published, then this can be my own way of living out Matthew 6:33, which says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all else will be given to you. So I started writing this book in November 2017, and eventually it became Lost and Found: Money versus Riches. By the end of January 2018, my 3-month gardening leave period was over, and for the first time in over 25 years, I could freely buy and sell stock without any prior approvals from my bosses. I still remember very, very distinctly. It was February 2nd. It was a Friday. It was Trumponomics, markets were good, everything was rosy. All of a sudden that evening, the Dow Jones Index dropped by an unholy 666 points. I was feeling a little anxious, not only because of this unholy index figure, but also because of the fact that the stock that I had pledged had already more than doubled from 100 to 200 plus. So I was asking God all day Saturday, Lord, is there anything you want me to do about the stock? Radio silence. I slept really poorly on Saturday, and I almost didn't get out of bed in time for church on Sunday. I arrived to hear the sermon, and I probably don't remember what my pastor was preaching about that day, except for this one sentence that he mentioned that seemed totally uncorrelated with anything else he was saying that day. My pastor said, when God speaks to us, usually it's in a really soft voice and in really simple words, such that we will definitely understand what he wants. Right after he finished that sentence, I heard one word crystal clearly: sell. Now, I've had a lot of experience in hearing from God, and I knew there was no doubt that this was the answer from him to my prayers. However, there was a problem. God, couldn't you be a little bit more specific on what you would like me to sell, and more importantly, when to sell it. Because from my 25 years of professional training, when the market is good and there's a dip, you don't sell the next day. You buy the dip. You don't sell into the dip, because a lot of times it rebounds. So I just struggled with that, and I took it in as a well noted with thanks type of comment, and I drove my kids and my wife to watch a kids show. I was glad that they didn't get me a ticket, so I just parked on the curb and I did my quiet time in the car. My quiet time routine for the past 5 to 6 years was as follows. Every day I would read one chapter of the Old Testament, one chapter of the New Testament, one chapter of Psalms, and the chapter of Proverbs corresponding to the date. That day was Sunday the 4th, so the Proverbs chapter I read was Proverbs 4. Now, I cannot explain why a few weeks prior to this event, all of a sudden I decided that I've been reading from the NIV for far too long and that I ought to switch to another version, another translation of the Bible. So I quote unquote randomly switched to the Message version. Proverbs 4 verse 5 from the NIV, which I've read 60 to 70 times before, said this. It says, "Get wisdom, get understanding." Now, nothing too exciting about that, right? But when I read for the first time the translation from the Message, Proverbs 4 verse 5, I almost fell out of my car. Eugene Peterson translated it this way: sell everything and buy wisdom. This was the first time in my life I had heard a multimedia message from God. In the past, it was audio, but this time it was not only audio, but also in the written word in front of my eyes. And this was in a span of 90 minutes, so I knew that he meant business. Right there and then in the car, I decided that even though it's against my professional training and market instincts, I'm going to sell everything in my portfolio the next day, because obedience to God is far more important than anything else to me. So Monday morning, I sold everything in Asia. In the afternoon, I sold everything in Europe. And in the evening, I sold everything in the US, including the stock I had pledged for church premises. I exited that stock at $227, which meant on a per share basis, there was $127 of profit, half of which I ended up giving to my church for the church premises. That evening, I slept really well, probably because all my anxieties were gone. The next morning, I got up and I prayed a very unusual prayer. I said, "Lord, please help me to not feel so stupid when I switch on my phone and find out that if everything has rebounded. Please comfort my heart. I sold everything just to be an obedient child of yours." Now, I had been married to Sylvia for close to 10 years at that point, and I had never woken her up because of the stock market. But after I prayed, I got out of bed and switched on my phone. I couldn't help but to do this. "Sylvia, Sylvia, 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 you're not going to believe this." After I sold everything, the Dow Jones dropped by another 1,500 points. And I felt this huge surge of electric current going through my body. And I had all kinds of silly thoughts going through my head. I was thinking, well, maybe you've achieved, super steward status. God now tells you, when it's time to sell high. Maybe as you pray, He will tell you when to buy low, and that will just mean more asset under management in my hands, and it's just more for the church and more for people in need, so on and so forth. But as I prayed, asking God what to do, He just kept telling me to be still, to be still. So for the longest time, I did nothing with the proceeds from liquidating my entire portfolio. and I just put it in money markets, earning close to nothing.